Hello. Welcome to another World of Warships destroyer inspection. And it is the Research Bureau Harugumo. Um, it's in the tech tree. Uh, but really, why do you play Harugumo in 2024? Well, you play Harugumo in 2024 for one of two reasons. One is you're trying to collect your Research Bureau points to get a ship you actually want to play, or two, you really enjoy giving bad destroyer players dev strikes on smoked up DDs, which would be you in this case. Uh Now, in all seriousness, do I think Harugumo is a bad destroyer? No, not really. Um I guess, and it's I'm kind of torn on how I want to describe the Harugumo, which rarely happens for me because on one hand, I feel like this is one of the most power crept destroyers in the entire video game. But on the other hand, there's no destroyer in tier 10 that has the bundle of gimmicks that Harugumo has. So, is it fair to describe it as power creep? And I guess what I would respond to that is yes. And the reason why I think it's fair to describe it as power creep is ultimately the Harugumo is a purely gun focused, bad concealment, bad maneuverability, smoke farming destroyer with really good DPM. Well, so is the Sherman. So is the Gdansk. So is really the Vamp too. So what makes you special? Well, there's really two things I would say that make the Harugumo like still special, and maybe three. It depends on how you build the ship, really. So one is obviously what everyone knows about, which is the 30mm base pen on the guns, right? And because of that 30mm base pen on the guns, you can go one of two ways. You can either achieve the highest fires per minute in the game of all the tier 10 destroyers. We'll talk about that more in port, but you can effectively get the most fires per minute out of Harugumo of all tier 10 destroyers if you build for fire damage, fire output. Or you can take IFHE, which will then allow you to pen 37mm of armor, obviously the crucial threshold you cross being 32. Now, I am personally of the opinion that Harugumo is better built for fires than built for the IFHE built for the pen. Uh, and that just really comes down to, like we discussed in the Schlieffen review, the amount of ships in the average lobby where IFHE is helping you is very, very small. Now, let's take a quick look at this matchmaker, right? I'm top tier. There's a bunch of tier 8s. Pretty cool. What would IFHE help me with? Well, not the Buffalo, not the Salmon, not the Orage, not the Holland, not the Gearing, not the Hayate, not the Cleveland, not the Schlieffen. So it would help me, I believe, on Ipiranga. I want to say that deck is mostly 32, right? So there's two Ipirangas. And I want to say Kansas is still stuck with a 32, and Monarch is stuck with a 32, right? So 4 of the 12 ships on the enemy team are going to, I'm going to do more penetration damage if I run IFHE, undeniably. Like that Monarch you saw me farming, I would have done a ton of penetration damage to him with IFHE, undeniably. But then I would have to give up this 14, well, really, actually, considering I'm running reload mod, I would have to give up about 16 fires per minute with the build I'm running. I just don't want to do that. Personally, I don't want to do that. There's way too many ships in this game, way too many battleships and cruisers in this game, and like we mentioned in some replays, like when we talked about Schlieffen, we talked about Hindenburg, power ship platings are only improving, really. They're only going up. And, I mean, you see on this Kansas, right? If I had IFHE, I would probably get virtually no non-pens, but it's like, he's 12.5 kilometers away, and I'm still getting basically 4-to-1 pens to non-pens, right? Because, I'm an okay aimer, right? It's not that hard to hit a Kansas superstructure at this kind of range, right? So yeah, those 12 or 13 shells that were non-pens would have been pens for an extra 3,000 damage. but I probably maybe would have not gotten the fire, right? So it's a trade-off. It's not a no-brainer. Now, the awkward thing about the Harugumo is that on your way to grinding the Harugumo, you go through the tier 8 and the tier 9. And the tier 8 and tier 9 are not just better ships tier for tier, undeniably. Akizuki and Kitakaze are two of the most really overpowered tier 8 and 9 respectively destroyers in the game, in my opinion. It feels like you're playing a tier 9 and a tier 10. And that's going to kind of lead us to, like, really almost the biggest problem with Harugumo is what is better about Harugumo than Kitakaze? Well, you have 20% more DPM because you have the same reload, and they just slapped an extra turn on it. But you have the same smoke, and you have the same torps, and you have the same guns. So all you really get over Akizuki is a few thousand more HP and 20% more DPM. But the cost you trade to get that over, or sorry, not Akizuki, to get that over Kitakaze is the maneuverability. The hit that you take to maneuverability in the Harugumo is truly the stuff of fucking nightmares. This ship is an absolute brick, and of course, like the rest of the line, doesn't really get any good speed or anything to make up for it. So you're very liable to hit torps, especially when you're smoked up. You're very likely to just eat shit in a gunfight. So, like, even if you theoretically pump out significantly more damage, right? Like, a good example, one of my go-to destroyer examples is a gun build Yu Yang, because a gun build Yu Yang, like, barely has, a bit over 200,000 DPM, right? And the Harugumo has, with reload mod, you're going to be over 250k HE DPM, over 350k AP DPM, right? But because you're so easy to hit, and a lot of the destroyers you fight are way harder to hit, what ends up happening is in the Harugumo is it's kind of oftentimes difficult to really visualize your DPM helping you in a lot of gunfights. Now, one thing that I think is not really discussed when I see a lot of reviews about Harugumo is the AP, and specifically because the AP has no pen. I want to make this clear. The AP on the Harugumo is, like, legitimately not really even good at farming battleships, because, like, even at 12 kilometers, you're down, like, I want to say at or below 32 mil pen, right? So you kind of can't even use the AP in Harugumo unless it's flat broadside targets at closer range. But, assuming a destroyer is giving you, I mean, I just accelerated into that torp because I'm retarded, but, so is that the boat being clunky, or is that my IQ score being quite low? Probably 80% me being a retard, and maybe like 20% the boat being clunky, right? Because it was retarded to accelerate, but in most destroyers, I still wouldn't have hit the torp, right? So little column A, little column B. But Harugumo still, at tier 10, in ideal situations, has the highest damage output on destroyers in the game. It is higher than Druid AP. It is higher than Marceau AP. It is higher than the Z42 AP. It is higher than Sherman Sap. It is higher than Regalo Sap. You do still have, in theory, the highest damage output on destroyers in the entire game of destroyers, because with reload mod, you are rocking something like 380,000 AP DPM. Now, you also, because of your low caliber guns, your AP shells arm on 17, which is mean they arm on every broadside destroyer in the game. And you are going to see that demonstrated here quite nicely, where on this broadside Holland, with a 2.2 second reload, I am taking 4,000 damage off him every salvo. Yeah, there's no destroyer that can do that. Even a Druid does not kill him that fast. Sherman Sap does not, like I said, does not kill him that fast. Honestly, really, like, you could, I don't want to maybe say substantially faster, but, Harugumo does have about 20 to 30,000 more DPM with AP than any destroyer has, because it's not really fair to compare Marceau AP, because the problem with Marceau AP is it needs 21 to arm, right? So most destroyers that are flat, you can't really use the AP on them. But yeah, the Harugumo AP against broadside destroyers is absurd. Like, legitimately just bananas. And there's a really good chance you've never run into a Harugumo player who has shot AP at your destroyer. And if you ever have, that experience will definitely stick with you. Like, I'm sure this Holland, that experience will stick with him. This man got absolutely fucking bodied by Harugumo AP. And, you know, you could argue, well, he's showing, he shouldn't be broadside. But here's the thing, man. People don't shoot AP out of their DDs, right? I think most people, obviously most people, you're a druid shooting AP because that's all it has, right? Even most people, it's probably on their radar that a daring might shoot AP at them, right? But like, people aren't used to you shooting AP at them. And that is still something. I mean, we can look at the damage received. Holland did 3,500. He did 3,500 damage and he lost 22,000 HP. The Hayate took 13,000. We took 46. We outdamaged the Orage 2-1 because, let's not count the torp that my room temp IQ caused me to hit, right? So, if we look at the Kansas, let's look at non-pens versus pens, right? So of our HE shell shot, well, I thought the game would tell you. Man, am I hallucinating? Did the game not used to tell you pens versus non-pens? I don't know. But my point being, I think you saw in that Kansas that with proper aim, IFHE is at farming large targets. It's probably giving you about 25% more damage output via pen damage, but then it's cutting your fires in half, right? So now it's a little weird the way it works in Harugumo. We'll go over this detailed import, but it's not really cutting your fires in half to run IFHE on the Harugumo. Realistically, it's cutting your fires by probably about 40%, which is kind of a weird situation, and that's kind of unique to these destroyers that have a low base fire chance, right? Because basically, instead of rocking a 7% fire chance, you're rocking like a 4.5% fire chance, right? So you're not starting half the fires, you're starting 2/3 the fires. We'll kind of get into that later, but the Harugumo is still in a slugfest, right? In an absolute slugfest. Your destroyer, their destroyer, 4 or 5 kilometers away. Still one of the best in the game because you still do have like a top 3 or a top 4 HEDPM. You have the highest damage output of all tier 10 destroyers in the game if you get to shoot AP at people, which you do get to shoot AP at a lot of destroyers in this thing, and you should absolutely be looking to do that. On this Holland, let's see how much damage we did with AP. Yeah, we did 19,000 damage with our AP shells, right? So I mean, and keep in mind, Harugumo also has the unique feature of the AP does about 50% more damage than the HE, right? It does a lot more damage. So your HE DPM goes from like 240 to 340, right? Whereas most destroyers with that kind of HE DPM, they would go from like 240k HE DPM to like 320k, right? So the jump up, the damage scaling when you load AP, because the AP does 1700 and I want to say the HE does 1200, right? It's a giant step up, and you absolutely just murder destroyers because you're basically shooting like just a crazy salvo every like 2.5 seconds at people, and they are not prepared for it at all. You're basically pumping out double the damage per salvo that most destroyers shooting HE are pumping back into you, but you're firing as fast, if not faster, than most of them, right? Like this thing against it, like if a daring's broadside to you and he lets you use AP against him, like you will fucking destroy that thing. And so that is like unique. So why do I say that it's power crept? Well, it's the fundamental concept of farming from smoke with a clunky, bad concealment destroyer. And first of all, for me, I'm not really that much of a smoke farmer. It's kind of relaxing, but it's not very relaxing to hit torps in your smoke, which happens all the time and is fucking big, right? But it's like, if I want to farm from smoke, like, why would I not play Daring or Vamp 2? Why would I not play uh, Gdansk? Why would I not play Sherman? Because, I mean, like, having these X Factor Torps, right? They have a terrible reload, and you get a reload booster, but they're slow, they're bad concealment, they have a really wide spread. Like, having the Torps is nice if you get rushed. But, like, at the end of the day, like, you're probably going to hit, like, maybe one Harugumo Torp a game. I would say probably less. I don't think I hit one this game. Wasn't even in a situation to shoot them most of the time. These Torps are just, like, basically just anti-rush Torps. So it's like, I could just be playing a bunch of these other ships. Like, I mean, honestly, it's not a ship that I, like, personally think is, like, super amazing. But if you want basically an identical playstyle, you could just get the Z42 for steel, right? Because they have kind of the same concealment, but the Z40, and the Z42 has, like, very similar AP DPM, obviously significantly worse HE DPM, but it's like, you could play Z42 with way better smokes and a hydro, and overall more useful torps because of the reload. I don't know. To me, the Harugumo's not interesting. I think that's the ultimate crime that it commits. To me, personally, the way I like to play the game, like, I like really almost cannot imagine, like, grinding this line to play the Harugumo in 2024. I still do, and I actually sometimes what I will do is I will run a I will run a heavy AP Harugumo build, and that's a vibe. Heavy AP Harugumo, is it good? No, don't run it, but it's kind of a vibe. Maybe I'll maybe at some point I'll do, like, some meme build videos, and we'll do, like, a heavy AP Harugumo video, because you could get about 470,000 AP DPM out of this thing if you go full retard. It's pretty funny. It's not good, but it is funny. Uh, Overall, I mean, what am I looking for in Matchmaker? I'm 100%, hoping for BBs and cruisers, because the problem with the Harugumo is there are typically one of two kinds of destroyers you will come up against, okay? And number one would be something like the Shimakaze, who we have, like, triple his damage output, right? We win that fight 100 out of 100 times, right? Well, the problem is you get outspotted by 0.6 by something like a Shima. You're one of the easiest destroyers in the game to land torpedoes on. You are slow, so you can't close the distance and spot them, right? So it's quite difficult to counter spot the destroyers that really fuck you up. Then there's another kind of destroyer that has similar gun power to you, or maybe a bit worse. This would be something like maybe a Marceau, a Vamp 2, a Daring, a Sherman, something like that, right? But the problem is that they typically have a significant advantage either in the landing the shell department, the dodging department, or they have a heal, right? Like, they have some kind of probably improved survivability that you are likely to not have. So, like, when you fight something like, let's just say a Marceau in the Harugumo, right? Well, on paper, that's, like, theoretically an okay fight for you. But the problem is that, like, he's really hard to hit. You're really easy to hit. And he has French saturation, right? So, like, the problem with the Harugumo's gun power is you kind of just often cannot bully anything. Like, typically ships are just too hard for you to counter spot in the case of something like a Shima, or they do a ton of damage back to you. You're a gunboat, you're big, you don't have a heal, you don't have crazy saturation or anything like that, right? So, like, even if I run into this Kitakaze, right, I'm in the tier 10 version, I have 20% more damage output, I have, like, 20% more HP. So, in theory I win that, but the problem is, like, he's gonna still do 80% as much damage to me as I am to him. And this is, like, not a boat you juke shells in, right? I mean, this is one of the clunkiest ships in the game. Destroyers in the game. It's not easy to dodge in. I mean, you see, like, the suffering trying to dodge these torps that would be like the easiest shit in the game to dodge. Even in big gunboats like a Gdansk would be way easier to dodge torps in. And I guess the thought that I have anytime I'm playing the Harugumo is like, bro, I could be playing the Gdansk. Like, I could be playing the Gdansk and have like almost as good smoke farming ability, overall better torps, overall better guns. Yeah, you know, I can fight destroyers way better because I have 5 radars, so I spot destroyers 5 times a game for free. I'm fast, so I can relocate. I mean, even though that thing's also big and clunky, it's at least fast, right? I mean, I would rather play Sherman. Yeah, I understand Sherman doesn't really have any torps, but like overall the guns are way better because the sap, you know, is way more effective than this thing's HE. You have kind of the same fires per minute, but Sherman has way better shell arc, so it's easier to play. You get the Hydro, so you don't need torps in the smoke. I'd much rather play something like, you know, a Vamp 2, a Daring. Overall, they farm from smoke better because they have more smokes. You're more in a position to use them, right? Again, overall better torps. So, you know, there's really a high incentive, I think, to take IFHE on this thing because, like, in theory, kind of the only special thing about it is your ability to pen something. But the problem is there's just not enough ships. There's not enough ships where penning 32 matters on. Now, if you could get 38, if you could get 38 millimeter pen on the Harugumos, you'd pen all the USN PBs. I think I'd probably run IFHE. I do. And, you know, I feel the same way about Schlieffen secondaries. If they could just pen 38. Because at least in the North American server, the USN BBs are just, like, the most popular. I mean, if you have 5 battleships on the enemy team, there's always 1, if not 2 or more USN BB. I mean, just in this lobby, right? Like, they have a Puerto Rico that has 38 millimeters on it. They have an Iowa that has 38 millimeters on it, right? So, like, there's 2 ships where IFHE would help me if it could pen 38. But IFHE is not helping against Gearing. It's not helping against Kitakaze. It's not helping against Shima, Cleveland, or a Gear, which has a 30 deck, or Golden Lion, which has a 30 deck and 40 sides, or Puerto Rico, which has 27 in parts and then 38 in parts, right? So it's not helping against Iowa, really, because I'm still going to aim superstructure. So I'm either going to get superstructure pens or ass, right? It's not even really going to help against Vincent because I already penned 25 for his nose and ass and some other parts of his ship. It's not going to help against Adatara, which I'm pretty sure is 25 nose and ass, and then I believe even 30 elsewhere. So, like, realistically, in most lobbies, you're running IFHE on Harugumo to like, damage 2 ships. Maybe 3 ships better. And then you give up about 40% fires per minute on everything else. And also, it's in, you know, the 4th captain slot, so you are giving up something good to have, right? You're 100% going to give up something you want to have to run IFHE. So it's a choice. But to me, overall, not really worth it. I would rather have range, to me. Now, something like a Monarch is, again, an ideal target, right? So you see here we're at half pens and half non-pens, right? The vast majority of those non-pens would be pens on his 32mm like deck, right? So something like the Monarch, we would definitely pump out more consistent damage against, undeniably. To me, there's just too many ships that you just have to go through fires to kill. Especially, dude, like ships like Puerto Rico and Golden Lion. Even if I could pen them everywhere, right? Even if IFHE gave me like 40 mil pen, I still don't think I would want it on those ships because they have enough 30 and they take 60-second fires and they can't run fire prevention, right? So, like, all super heavy cruisers, regardless of how they're armored, IFHE would cuck you. All destroyers, it would cuck you, right? And then, like, half the battleships and half the cruisers in the game, it cucks you. So, I don't know. It's a choice. It's definitely an option. One I don't personally enjoy. Then again, I also don't play Harugumo that much. I'm playing the tier 8 and 9 quite a bit to get, you know, the points for them, but that's kind of about it. Kind of a fuck situation that this guy comes around the rock, so definitely not, you know, something I'm going to keep shooting against because I don't want to waste my last smoke, obviously, just to disengage. But yeah, the Harugumo has what I would, I use this term a lot, deterrent style DPM. I typically use that term to refer to cruisers against battleships, right? Because the battleships will always win, but the cruisers will pump out maybe enough damage. They have deterrence DPM. And I would kind of say the Harugumo is the same type of gunboat. Like, you're so big, so you take massive damage. You're so slow, so you take massive damage. You don't have the speed to counterspot things that outspot you. So you're kind of just like this artillery platform that, like, yeah, the Shima outspots you, and you will never outspot the Shima unless he lets you outspot him. But your damage output is so disgusting that, like, that guy's never gonna be able to open up on you, right? Um, and that to me is why the Harugumo I personally find a bit awkward. Because, like I've mentioned in my cruiser and battleship reviews, my personal playstyle preference is starting the game in an aggressive forward position and falling back as needed. And the Harugumo is definitely the polar opposite of that. Like, pushing into this to caps early is just 100% not a thing you are going to want to do in this ship, because you're very likely to get torped by just random ass torps, right? Even if you don't get torped, you're very likely, like you saw there, just to lose half your HP instant, right? You're one of the easiest destroyers in the game to hit. And my thing is, like I mentioned, the Gdansk. Gdansk is a ship where you can start the game by playing right in people's faces, and then you can run away and disengage and then smoke farm. And the Harugumo is like the exact opposite. You've got to smoke farm first most of the time, and then you can often, push in and afford to fight the destroyers. But really the biggest problem is how easy you are to shit on. So this is a perfect example. Running IFHE on something like an Agir would fuck us so incredibly hard, because the 30mm pen is already enough for his nose, ass, and deck and superstructure, and the rest of his ship is, more than 37. So all we would be doing if we ran IFHE against something like the Agir would take much longer to get relight fires on him, right? And also, there's so many battleship idiots that don't run fire prevention. Like, if fire prevention in this game was like, let's pretend fire prevention was a 1-point skill and 99% of battleship players ran fire prevention, I would then, again, be super incentivized to run IFHE on this thing. Because it's like, well, I'm not going to get double fires anyway, and I'm hitting so many shells, I'm going to get singles, right? But the reality is, there's so many super heavy cruisers like this Agir, Puerto Rico. Like, there's 3 in this lobby, right? There's 3 ships in this lobby that have, like, decks that I pen and take 60-second fires without fire prevention, right? A ton of battleship idiots don't take fire prevention. So giving up that ability to, like, guarantee double fires is a bit, I don't know, a bit sus to me, undeniably. I just think it's a bit sus. So, a lot of people disagree with that. A lot of people run, like, IFHE Wooster too. To me, like, there's just other ships to play. The Harugumo, we'll kind of look at the math in the port, but you're basically the highest fires per minute in the game, pretty much tied with the Vampire 2, assuming you build for fires, right? So to give that up and then to have, like, decent fire starting, I don't know. Just don't really know about that one. And to give that up to, again, to increase your damage output, in theory, sometimes on about 1/3 to 1/4 of the targets in the game. That's the debate, right? It is a debate. Some people enjoy it. But I just think overall, the ship is too passive for my liking. I'm an aggressive bot. I like to run at people. I like to play aggressive. Especially I like to play aggressive early. Then I'll maybe lose some HP and fall back if I have to. Harugumo has no ability to get away because it's slow and it's big, right? So the damage output is still, like, very respectable. And on paper, it's still one of the best in the game. The problem is utilizing the damage output, right? Like, I've said this to many people on the subreddit, and they don't seem to, like, comprehend this principle, but, like, you can't just go to ship tool and sort by DPM, right? You can't just go to ship tool and sort by statistics and say, well, this ship is better than that ship because it has more DPM, right? Like, Harugumo, AP, like I said, it's way better DPM than Druid DPM, but like Druid has short fuse and improved pen angles. Like Harugumo DPM, AP DPM is like significantly better than Vampire 2 DPM, but the Vampire 2 DPM has improved pen angles and shorter fuse, right? So it's like, is it? No, it's not. It's theoretically better, right? In a unicorn situation, like a broadside destroyer, yeah, it's better. But then they angle with 40 degrees, and now it's shit, right? And then you have to go back to HEDPM, whereas that Vamp 2 is still rocking 350k AP DPM, and you're stuck on 250k HE, right? So it's, like on paper, the DPM is extremely, extremely high. It does probably still have the highest effective raw HEDPM because it's a bit below like Marceau and Smolin and Vamp 2, but because you have the you actually, I believe, have slightly better shelf light time than like by maybe half a second, right? And you pen more, so it's effective. But the problem is, right? Yes, in a situation where you are stationary and people are pushing into you, Harugumo is still probably the king, right? It's still probably the king of DPM as a turret. Like you're playing a tower defense simulation in this game. You're probably still the best DPM. But the problem is utilizing the DPM, right? Like daring DPM is crazy easy to utilize because you can get within 8 or 10 kilometers of people, pop a smoke, and farm 30k. Run away, pop a smoke, farm 30k. Run away, pop a smoke, farm 30k. And in the Harugumo, you pop a smoke, farm 30k, and then you get pushed. So you have to run away. And then you have to wait 2 minutes to smoke again, right? And you're slow, so it's harder to position in a way to get DPM off on people. It's just, the numbers are not the whole story, right? I wish more, most people that like, in the comments seem to understand the game. But a lot of people like in the general community on the Reddit just don't seem to like understand that you can't just like sort by DPM, right? Because it's like, a perfect example, I'm comparing this ship to Gdansk, right? Well, Harugumo has more HE DPM than Gdansk, but like Gdansk has rail guns so you don't miss people, right? And that's why like in my Gdansk review, I correctly stated that effectively Gdansk is the highest HE DPM and the highest HE fire starting in the game of all tier 10 destroyers because the rail guns means you don't miss. Not missing people is kind of a big fucking deal when it comes to HE spamming them, right? It doesn't matter if this thing is pumping out an extra 2 or 3 fires a minute and an extra 20k HE DPM if it's missing half the salvos because like, newsflash, cruisers that are actively maneuvering at 12 kilometers aren't that easy to hit with Harugumo, right? And they're all of a sudden really easy to hit with like Gdansk Sherman. So, I just think the role is power crept. Like the specific ship, right? It's not power crept in the way that Preussen has power crept GK, where it's the same fucking boat with better guns and better firing angles, right? It's not that kind of power creep. It's what I would say like is role power creep. Like we have Sherman, Gdansk, Vamp 2 that smoke farm better than this thing, but also can do other things. That's the issue. The Harugumo is still a one-trick pony, and World of Warships has introduced destroyers over the last 3 years that do the smoke farm role every bit as good, but then have versatility or more survivability, right? And I think that's ultimately the problem. Okay, I don't think there's really like hardly any wiggle room on the build here. There is the ability to run the ledge mod, turning this thing into a bit of a smoke bot. And basically what that is doing is giving you, if you fully build for it, like a 45% smoke puff time, right? It is giving you a puff time, and then it is giving you like a couple minutes of dispersion. I just think like a gearing with smoke build or a YY with smoke build is just a better smoke bot. And also Smokebot Harugumo, unlike Smokebot YY, is cancer to play. Dubious ledge mod, but I mean it does put out a silly goofy wall of smoke, right? Because you'll basically end up with like 45 seconds uptime and 2 minutes of dispersion time. So it's kind of giving you like a gearing smoke at the cost of you will never spot an enemy destroyer ever in your life. Dubious to me. Captain build. This I had actually changed it around. Okay, don't. This isn't the build. Okay, this is this is my funny build. This is actually my go-to Harugumo build because it's dumb. But the real build is preventative maintenance, last stand. It's your typical build, your typical 13-point build with AR, range, and fire chance. And we can talk about the fire chance a bit because Harugumo is, again, like Yu Yang we discussed, a unique candidate for fire improvement because the base fire chance on this thing is only 5%, right? So, 5%, so if you run the captain skill and you run the 2 flags, then that will give you a 7% fire chance, right? So you can buff your fires per minute by 40%. Right, so while on paper, again, if you're a ship tool enjoyer, right, like a lot of this community is, you will see that the Vampire 2 has a way better, well, maybe not way better, but a better smoke or a better fire starting ability than Harugumo. But because of the fire chance, you can buff Harugumo's fire starting by 40% with the flags and the captain skill, and you can only buff Vamp's fire starting by 25%. So it basically puts them on par as fire starters. So you are effectively on par with Vamp 2 as like the best fire starting DD in the game. Something to consider. And then that is also why IFHE on Harugumo is less painful than on other ships, because IFHE is going to lower your fire chance to 2.5%, but then if you run the 2 fire flags and you run the fire skill, you're back up to 4.5%. So instead of reducing your fires by half, like most destroyers or a lot of destroyers do, obviously if you run fire flags, you won't reduce everything by half. But something like the Wooster, right, is a good example. So like if you run IFHE on the Wooster, because the base fire starting of each individual shell is like, what is it, 12-13%, right? So you're chopping it down to 6, and then you can only get back up to like 8, right? So you're cutting your fires per minute on something like a Wooster by a solid 1/3, or a solid like 40%. On this, you're cutting them a bit less, right? Basically, if you take the fire skills and flag, then you're coming back to like 90% of what you started with. But I don't know. Like I said multiple times, it's a debate. Now, what I was mentioning with the other parts of the line being strange is that I do think that the tier 8 and 9 running IFHE is almost a no-brainer, which is a really weird thing to say, but if you think of it like this, right? So you think of all these ships, like all these USN battleships, right? Louisiana, the flight deck is 38. Montana, deck and upper belt is 38. Vermont is like 51 in a bunch of places, right? But what if you look at the lower tier versions, right? Kansas is 32 everywhere, right? What about North Carolina? North Carolina has the 38 deck, but the whole casemate side is 32, right? And then I think even if we go to, so this is the point that I'm getting at, is a bunch of these ships that at tier 10, IFHE's super sus. But all of a sudden you go to like a bit lower tier, and it's not super sus all of a sudden, because now everyone's got like 32 basically everywhere, right? Like, Amagi's a tier 8, right? The high tier IJNs, they have, what, a 57mm main deck section, right? You go to Amagi. Amagi's 32 everywhere, right? So that was my point, is that it's kind of awkward because I would make the case that, and remember, this is coming from someone, I overall do not think IFHE on Harugumo makes sense. But I think, like, on Akizuki, it is basically objectively superior to no IFHE. Because, like, at tier, remember, this ship is playing at tiers 6 through 10. Yeah, against tier 10s, it's not helping you, even against some tier 9s. But anytime you get tier 8, 7, 6 matchmaker in Akizuki, like, you're penning everything basically, right? Kitakaze, every time you get tier 9 and under matchmaker, you're penning almost everything. Like I want to say tier 9 is kind of the tier where a lot of these BBs get a bit improved plating. Yeah, so like Izumo gets the 57 deck, but it's not that much of it, right? So like even against a ship like Izumo, IFHE is way better than a ship like Yamato, right? So that's kind of the overall point. And also what do we know about lower tier battleships, right? Or what should you know about lower tier battleships? They have less fire resistance, right? Tier 10s get 50% fire reduction. Tier 9s, I want to say it's maybe 42, 43, right? It's low 40s. And then tier 8, it's all the way down to like high 30s fire reduction. So remember what I said is you're not really cutting your fire chance in half by taking IFHE. You're reducing it by 30 to 40%. But tier 8s have 30 to 40% less resistance to fire than tier 10s do. So your fire starting with IFHE Akizuki on a North Carolina is better than your fire starting with no IFHE on a Montana. And if you run IFHE, you pen the North Carolina on every square inch of its hull, right? So when I grind through this line, right, because, that's like typically what I do for research ships. And this is why I still think Harugumo is relevant. This is sad, but this is the relevance of Harugumo. It's not just, okay, it's not just that you need the fewest amount of XP points to get from tier 5 to 10 on Harugumo when you reset the line. It's not just that it takes the least amount of HP. It's that Akizuki and Kitakaze are two of the most overpowered tier 8 and 9 ships respectively in the entire game. So your performance per battle is ridiculously higher in Akizuki and Kitakaze than it is in other ships that you reset, right? Like they just farm mad amounts of base XP because they're so crazy. Like playing Akizuki against tier 8s, bro, is it's crazy that that's even legal. Basically, in my mind, this whole tier should be shifted up. Like, the Akizuki is a tier 9, the Kitakaze is a tier 10, and then we could even, like, give Harugumo buffs, and we could literally make this ship a super ship by buffing it. Like, legitimately, this line could be bumped up a full tier. Harugumo could become the tier 11, and then all we'd have to do is, like, take 0.5 off the reload, and then you'd be, like, the absolute undisputed king of DPM or something, right? They'll never do that, but I mean, these ships are crazy OP for their tier. And like I said, because the battleships in their tier are 32 everywhere, or they're 32 like 50% more places than the tier 10 versions of the ships they fight. Yeah, IFHE on the tier 8 and 9 is crazy. But that's why this line is like the best, because what I do, I think this is what most people do when they reset it, is you just free XP to Akizuki, which costs you like maybe 180, 200,000 free XP. You just run blue boosters, and like in 5 or 6 games you get Kita. In 10 or 12 games you get Harugumo. You can grind out a research bureau reset on this line, like basically in 4 or 5 hours. And then if you run red boosters, it's like in 2 hours you can literally just play through the tier 10 from 8. So that is sadly, like in my opinion, the reason to get Harugumo is the tier 8 and 9 are some of the most enjoyable tier 8 and 9 ships in the game. Like they don't really care if they're up tier because they still have consistent damage output. Fighting their own tier, they bully basically everything. Yeah, they're just really, really good tier 8 and 9 ships. Like, they're way better. And this is why people will often say things like the Kitakaze is better than the Harugumo. I don't maybe go that far. That, like, if you had to play Kitakaze in tier 10 only matchmaker, it's better in the sense that it's more maneuverable. The Kitakaze is undeniably more maneuverable than Harugumo, so you like are less likely to hit a torpedo, which is a really nice advantage. But, Harugumo does have, 4,000 more HP or so. It does have 20% more DPM. Yes, it's better, but what we have here is kind of like an Alaska, Puerto Rico situation where, like, the Kitakaze is 90, even including the extra HP and the extra DPM, because Kitakaze is smaller, more maneuverable, more survivable because of that. Same torp, same smoke, basically same guns. The Kitakaze feels like 95% as good as Harugumo, but it's a whole tier lower, right? And the Akizuki, is 95% as good as the Kitakaze. So realistically, what's happening is like tier for tier, the Akizuki is a straight up tier 9. The Kitakaze is a decent tier 10. And the Harugumo is a decent tier 10. So like to me that's kind of what's happening. I mean, if you want to play a high DPM smoke farming ship, in my mind, you just get Sherman for coal. You just grind the Gdansk. Gdansk is just like so much better than the Harugumo overall. It's kind of insane. Like it can fight, it can hunt destroyers. It farms with HE better because of the railguns. It farms from smoke better because you're more likely to be in a good position to pop the smoke. The torps are way better overall because of the speed, concealment, and the reload. Uh, it's a tough ship to recommend other than, getting research points with. Armor layout, I mean, there's nothing special. It's 19 everywhere. It's just big. It's just really, 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 really big. Even compared to something like a Shimakaze, I mean, it's so long. Like the Harugumo is so long is kind of the big thing. It's not so much thicker than most DDs, but it's just the length means like when you mislead it, right? Like you overlead or underlead a bit, you still kind of end up hitting it. So this HP pool, while on paper, is great, right? On paper, 29,000 HP is awesome, but it just doesn't feel like you have that kind of HP, right? If you play ships like Regolo or Alvaro de Bazan, you will understand this concept, right? Those ships also have like a bit over 30,000 HP, and they're basically like the same size as Harugumo. They're actually a little smaller. Like Harugumo is bigger than Alvaro de Bazan. Like it's longer at least. I don't know about the beam. Alvaro might be a bit thicker, but the Harugumo is plenty thick to make sure all DD AP that arms on you pens you. It's just long, so you don't have to be a great aimer to catch it. It's slow too, so you don't have to be a great aimer. Just not very survivable. The HP pool is misleading. At least ships like Regolo and Alvaro have the speed to somewhat compensate, right? They go significantly faster than this thing. The rudder shift's okay, the turning circle's okay, but it's noticeably worse than most DDs, and the speed is pretty mediocre. It's not horrible, but for the size of the ship, right? Or like Elbing, okay? I can't believe I forgot my queen of the ocean, the Elbing. Bro, why would you ever play this ship over Elbing? This is a serious question. Why would you ever play this ship over Elbing? I'm not. I'm just straight up not playing this over Elbing. Like, not a fucking chance, dude. Elbing is a way better destroyer than Harugumo. Yeah, that's the review. Harugumo, a good ship to get because the tier 8 and 9 grind are quite pleasant. That's my recommendation, right? If you, for some reason, haven't grinded this line, like, just free XP the Akizuki, build it for guns, dominate in like ranked, especially if you're playing tier 8 or 9 ranked. Both of those ships are crazy picks. Honestly, if you're playing the tier 8-9 version of ranked, which I think is this season, I would just straight up play Akizuki because you then force the enemy team to run a destroyer that's way worse than you because it's basically the best DD in all of tier 8. And then it's 90% as good as Kitakaze anyway. So yeah, I would just free XP to the tier 8, play it for guns, play the Kitakaze for guns, unlock the Harugumo, and just don't play it. And just reset the line, get your research points. That would be my recommendation if for some reason you don't have the Harugumo yet. But to actually get it to play it, not a chance. That'll do it. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.